Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and today we've got a very special guest. Her name's Dr. Karen Parker, and she's the creator of Quantum Human Design and author of Quantum Wellness, Healing Your Mind, Body, and Spirit with Human Design. She holds a PhD in integrative medicine. She spent over 30 years at the intersection of health, research, energy, psychology, and human design. And that's enough for me. This podcast is all about healthy living, and we talk about all aspects. And it sounds like you're going to be a really great conversation. Dr. Karen, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. As we get started, one of the things I like to kind of start the conversation with is, you've got this wealth of experience and sounds like an interesting story. And I'd like to always hear about how our guests got to where they are. So what brought you to all of this?
I'm old, so that's a long
I'm right there with you. I gotcha.
So I would say my story first started in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I was working at that time as a midwife. I had my own home birth practice. And as I was working with my clients, I started to kind of intuitively sense when I knew that somebody was going to have complications during the birth process and when somebody was going to have a good birth. And that it got my attention because I really wasn't exactly sure why I was intuiting what was going on, but I could start to see a pattern. And that pattern was playing out in the stories that the women would tell me about who they are, what they expected. And oftentimes, particularly when we talk about birth, how much control they felt like they had to have over the experience. I didn't work for long as a midwife because I ended up having my own kids and taking kids, and balancing work and family. Midwifery was a little bit tricky. But I went on in 1998 to study life coaching. And as I became actually one of the first trained life coaches in the United States, I started to see that I had that same intuitive awareness with my coaching clients. So if somebody was struggling with money or relationships or right work, I could hear it in their story, sort of this meme or this holographic story that would be duplicating in every piece of their life. So if they were struggling with self-worth, it was often also showing up in money, and it was showing up in their relationships, and it was showing up in their body, or again, in their relationship with their right work. So that really got my attention, and I started listening more and more intently. And as I began to really sort of catalog people's stories, I started wanting to have some kind of a system to really begin to give my clients a systematic approach to exploring what part of your story isn't working, what part of your story is sort of duplicating itself in all these different areas of your life. So in 2000, I encountered a system called Human Design. Human Design is a personality assessment system that's a synthesis of Eastern and Western astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the Hindu chakra system, Judaic Kabbalah, and a smidgen of quantum physics. Really, though, what that system is a way of looking at who you are, and most importantly, how you are, through the lens of ancient and modern archetypes, or parts of a story. So when I started using Human Design in my coaching practice, I was really using it as a way to assess and support my clients in taking back control over their story and starting to figure out where in your story are you holding yourself back? Where in your story are you creating limitation or lack in your external life? So that kind of started a long, long journey of working with Human Design and working with Human Design as a storytelling tool, and ultimately using Human Design later on as a tool to explore with my clients how they can intentionally use narrative psychology as a way of consciously rewriting the story they're telling about who they are and how they are, so they can optimize well-being in every area of their lives.
Wow. So Human Design, what is the source of that? Is it through a school or an individual or a church or what?
Human Design is It's not just through one individual. It's a
Okay.
system. It's basically rooted in astrology. So there are actually quite a few human design teachers. And of course, we
Oh,
teach
okay.
human design ourselves. Yeah.
Interesting. I'd never heard of it before. That's why I asked.
Ah, okay, cool.
So now you're using this human design tool and working with your clients and your life coaching and getting this to help them to tell their story in a way that you can help them more, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so from this point, you created quantum human design. How did you go from one to the next?
So when I look at stories, the stories we tell about who we are and how we are, we have to go through a couple of steps in order to take back control over our story. And usually when we start telling a story or we get stuck in a story and that story is impacting our wellness. And when I talk about wellness, I'm not only talking about the body, I'm talking about our capacity to intentionally create a good life, right?
Absolutely.
That the primary two phases in taking back control over the story are first and foremost decoding the story, right? We have to learn where did the story come from and why, based on our lived experiences, are we interpreting our life events through whatever lens we're interpreting those events. And then we have to take back take back control over the story, and we do that through recoding the story. So traditional human design, which is, again, this synthesis of ancient and modern archetypes, is this really powerful tool that supports you in learning how to decode the story. Basically, human design, if you run your birthday, birth time, and birthplace, it spits out a chart. Kind of like an astrology chart. It doesn't look anything like an astrology chart, though. It really is a map for how you process and experience energy. And how you process and experience energy influences how you interpret your life experiences. So, for example, if you run a chart and you see that on that chart, you are emotionally receptive, meaning you're an emotional empath. And that's about half of us. When you are an emotional empath, you learn very easily that one way to stay emotionally safe in your life is to control the emotional energy in the room. And many people learn how to control the emotional energy in the room by being nice, by being people pleasers, by not asking for what you want and need and trying to keep everybody in the room happy. So when you start to recognize, oh, in my personal story, because I am emotionally sensitive, I have learned to walk into a room, read that room, and do what I know that the people in that room need me to do to stay happy instead of asking for what I need and want. Now, if that becomes a lifelong pattern, we get to a point at a certain place in our story where we get resentful. We start telling a story that says, well, I do everything for everybody else and nobody does anything for me, right? We get burned out with overcaring or being overly sensitive to the emotional environment in the room. And the body eventually, or other areas of our life, start to show symptoms of that. In that first phase of rewriting your story, you're going to recognize, oh, I have a story that I'm telling. And in that story, I'm the one responsible for everybody else's happiness. Well, is that a true story? You know? And
It's
so
a crazy story.
Yeah. And so when you start to understand that, that gives you the power to start decoding that story, to start recognizing, oh, when I walk into the room and I feel all this energy, I'm not responsible for that energy. I can take stock of where is that coming from and say, okay, this isn't mine. I'm not responsible for it anymore. In part 2, which is where the quantum human design comes in part 2, we learn to recode that story. And so in my studies and my work with human design for the first 10 years, I did a lot of decoding. But I started to get clients who had already done decoding. They were coming to me and saying, you know, I've already meditated for 10 years. I've been to therapy. I've done a lot of work. And I appreciate human design. And if I had learned human design 10 years ago, it would have really helped me. But now I'm in this place where I feel pretty decoded. I'm at baseline. I want to go beyond baseline from surviving into thriving. And so I took all of the vocabulary of traditional human design into a sound lab and actually experimented with vocabulary words to create a series of high frequency vocabulary words. And then I use those words in what I called quantum human design as a tool then to help people not only decode their story, but to actually start recoding it. So for example, if you are an emotional empath, right? If you walk into the room and you feel all that emotional energy, well, in the highest expression, to go from surviving to thriving or to recode that story, you have to have a new narrative that says, I can hold on to my own emotional integrity no matter what's going on in the room around me or in the world around me. And so you learn to self-regulate that core aspect of your story and to retell it in such a way that you say, I'm an empath, but I'm not responsible for the emotional energy in the room. I'm actually the person who can come in and regulate the energy in the room by staying connected to my core and staying centered.
Wow. And tell me about the high frequency vocabulary that maybe explain that a little bit.
So yeah, that's the part that's a little complicated because human design, traditional human design, probably has about 120 different parts of the human design system. So human design as a system is pretty complex. It's not complicated, but it's complex. And it has different vocabulary words for different parts of the story.
Got it.
So for example, in human design, there are 5 different energy types. So you're born into an energy type. And each one of those energy types has a name. That's the traditional human design name. And that traditional human design name tells you a lot about the shadow of the types, but not always about the highest potential of the types. So I took those 5 names and experimented with finding different ways of expressing the higher themes of those names and tested them in the sound lab to come up with higher frequency words. So for example, in human design, we have an energy type called the manifester. In the quantum expression, the manifester evolves. It's kind of like a butterfly, right? It goes from caterpillar to cocoon to butterfly. So you evolve from sort of this story that needs decoding to the baseline expression of the story, and then to the higher, more evolved expression of the story. So the manifester becomes the initiator. There's an energy type called the generator, which becomes an alchemist in the evolved expression. There's a type called the manifesting generator. They become time benders. There's a type called a projector. They become orchestrators. And a type called a reflector who becomes a calibrator. So we adjusted all that. And then we use it in a storytelling template where the client then looks at their chart, looks at the different parts of their chart, and then starts using this higher frequency language to write out a new story about who are they growing into becoming beyond the healing path of returning to baseline.
So this has to do with the way they're addressing themselves and words they're choosing and the meanings of those words.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we literally take them through a very specific process called Story Lab, where they begin to systematically explore the different layers of their story and how their energy works, and actually go through and rewrite those stories, those core narratives, in a very creative, templated way.
I really like your expression of the human experience as a story, because that's really what we're all doing. We're writing and telling a story, and I don't see a whole lot of people acknowledge it that way. I like that a lot. Well, you've been working now with clients for many, many years. And ultimately, was it last year you just published the book Quantum Wellness?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So how did you get from I'm working with all these people, you now have this system that you've developed, and you're watching this work, and how does that correlate to the book?
Well, part of that, the book is actually an outcropping of some of the research that I did for my dissertation. So in the research that I did for my dissertation, what I found was that when we tell stories about who we are and how we are that are disempowering or in some way cause us to feel like we're a victim of a circumstance or a situation. So we all have those stories. We have old stories that we tell again and again and again. We get stuck in tape loops. When we tell those stories, especially when we tell them out loud and we share them with others, it actually causes our immune response to go down. Our IgA levels drop, especially if there's a lot of intense emotional energy with them. So if you have a lot of anger or a lot of resentment, your immune system drops every time you tell that story again. So when you go out with your girlfriends, or you go out and hang out with your family or whoever, and you're telling the story about this happened to me, or my ex-partner did this, or when we tell those stories, not only are we re-anchoring them into the nervous system, we're actually causing our immune response to go down. So in the research that I did, I took people into the lab and I said, let's take the story, let's rewrite it through a creative lens. Let's rewrite it in such a way that instead of you being the victim in the story, that you emerge from this experience with either a lesson that catalyzed you into your growth and expansion, or you retell the story in such a way that you're no longer a victim, but you emerge from the story the victor. You've emerged winning the story, if you will.
Okay.
And I told them you can use anything you want. You can use a creative response. You can add superheroes to the story. You do anything you want, as long as you stay in that creative space of rewriting it and taking back control over the narrative. So when people rewrote the story, we had them come back and read the new story out loud. And what we found was that their immune response actually went back up after they had that experience of retelling the story through a different lens or a different perspective.
Wow.
So what I wanted to do, and what with the Quantum Wellness book, was to give people not only a template for how to consciously rewrite any stories that they're stuck in, but using human design, proactively begin to look at every layer of your story systematically and start taking back control over all those little pieces of your story, so that you are intentionally writing a new narrative that reflects your power, your creativity, your value, your self-worth, your courage, your emotional wisdom, your decisiveness, all these core pieces of resiliency.
Wow, it's wild. Something just came to me through this tool of using language and vibration, I guess, to affect the outcome through your telling of a story. It almost, I'm seeing a connection to Dr. Emoto's work with water and water memory. We're all made of memory, and it seems like you can affect water by using language and vibrations, and drink that water, and that water's going to affect you. It almost seems like there's a connection. I don't know, just kind of a tangent, but
Well, it is. I mean, in the sense that the language that we use impacts the body. And if you go look at Dr. Masaru Emoto's work, obviously the bulk of our body is made of water. So when we're speaking good quality words, our body is responding to that. And of course, there's a lot of very interesting emerging science around that, including science around how language impacts the way DNA coils. So DNA coils tightly when we speak negative language to it. And if we put DNA in a jar and we speak positive words to the DNA, it actually expands. And when DNA expands, its capacity to hold photons or light, which is an important part of how the nervous system functions and how the body communicates. When you have a relaxed coil of DNA, it can hold more light, and it impacts well-being in the body. So I would say we're at a very, very beginning phase in our science of looking at how does language impact our physical body. Certainly, we know that optimists live longer. They have longer telomeres on their genes. They can live up to 20 years longer. We know that people who are optimistic are more resilient. We know they have less illness. We know they have better immune systems. And what is it about an optimist that creates that? We don't know yet, right? But I suspect some of it has to do with what language are they using.
I couldn't agree more. If you believe you can do it, you can do it. And if you know you can do it, you can do it even better.
Yep, it's true.
So in your training, you work as a life coach, you work with, I guess, the general population, but I'm also seeing that you're working with practitioners or training practitioners. Tell me a little bit about how that's come to be.
Well, I've been training people since 2005 to use human design as a therapeutic tool in their practice.
Okay.
So I don't actually work privately with clients anymore, except for when
okay.
But I do train practitioners to do work with clients. Yeah.
Okay. So when somebody comes to you for training, you just like with, just being a regular life coach, you're going to see some people, you're going to go, oh, I can do this pretty simply. I got the tools I need. Others you see, you go, oh boy, I got my work cut out. I don't know how effective I'm going to be with this person. I'm sure with these practitioners, you come up with all different types of people thinking, oh, I want to be a practitioner. What does it take for somebody to be I'm sure you recognize pretty quickly, okay, this person is going to really excel at this. What are what sort of things does a person have that cause them to do well in your program?
Hi, this is Joe Grumbine, and I wanted to share an update. The platform that hosts this podcast has made some changes to the subscriber settings, and we have a number of subscriber-only episodes that we offer to the supporters, and for a minimum of $3 a month, we can get you signed up. And if you're already signed up and you're having some kind of trouble locating these episodes in the other platforms, I would say maybe the best answer is to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. I'm sorry for the hassle. I don't have any way to make a change, but I'm very grateful for all the support. Thank you.
That's a great question. I like that question a lot. That's a good question for me to continue to contemplate. I mean, certainly I would say our programs are structured in two ways, because one of the things that I teach is that you are only going to be able to lead your clients as far as you yourself have gone. And so our students are engaged in the training with a deep personal process with the learning as well, because everybody has stories they need to decode. We all do. And so when we do our trainings, we walk our students not only through the material, but actually through their own process of decoding and recoding their own story. And certainly I'll say, we have clients, we have students that show up that are at very varying different levels, but that's okay, because we have you're going to attract a client that's going to be at the level where you yourself are. And of course, our training is pretty rigorous. We have certification processes and we have mentorship processes and a team of really amazing support staff and teachers who are working with our students to make sure that they get a good, deep, integrated training and understanding of the material.
Nice. So as you've been doing this, I'm sure that, and it may be with personal client, maybe with the trainer or with somebody that you're training as a practitioner, there's generally, a few stories that just stand out. I mean, in this quantum world, I have just recently recovered from a very aggressive cancer. And I went through a point in my treatment and my own healing that I experienced a quantum world. I went into a place where I was with quantum energy, if you will, and I can't explain it completely because it's crazy, but I was there and I did stuff with it, and I know it's real. And I think science is just barely beginning to be able to quantify things. They say they've teleported little particles and quantum computers and all these little things that are hard to even wrap your head around. But you're working with it on a fundamental level where you don't have to understand all the little details. You just work with things that work and observe what you're doing. I bet you've got a couple of stories, or at least one, of somebody that really stands out where they came to you and the tools that you offer and the training that you gave just had a remarkable response and experience. Can you pick something out like that to share with us?
I would say we have a lot of examples, but I think I'll just share my own story, because this really was a second part of what catalyzed my work and my research. When I turned 40, I developed breast cancer, and at that time, I was a full-time single mom. I had 5 kids. I had 4 kids at that time. I was raising my kids by myself. I was responsible for all the finances, for all the care. And I had several years in a row where I had one day off a year for Christmas.
Wow.
And when I discovered my breast cancer, fortunately, I had a form of breast cancer that was fairly treatable. And then I was given a chemotherapeutic agent called tamoxifen, which tamoxifen has a terrible side effect for some people, and it creates a very deep depression. I've never experienced depression in my life except for that point. And I got into I took the tamoxifen, and very shortly into taking it, I realized there was no way I was going to be able to sustain my life and take this medication. The darkness for me was just so heavy, and
Wow.
I couldn't function. I couldn't work. I couldn't do anything. And so I decided that I really needed to have a conversation with my body and ask my body, what did it need and what story was it telling that caused me to get sick? And so I went into a deep, conversation with my body, and I said, what's going on? And my body very clearly told me that, breasts are all about nurturing, and that I had not done self-nurturing in years, and that my body was really clearly saying, we can't do this anymore, that you have got to get some rest and self-nurturing and cultivate patterns of care. And of course, that caused me to have to go decode my own story. I come from a lineage of women who left it all on the table for everybody that they loved. I came from a lineage of women who were single moms because of war and because of widowhood, and I had to rewrite that old story within me and then recode it towards something better. And so, going through this same process that I teach my own clients, I really worked on my own personal story and recoded that story around my own value and my own ability to take care of myself as the foundation for my family and for my children. And that process, I think, got me. Again, I don't advocate this for anybody else. This was my personal choice, but I took myself off the tamoxifen and began a very rigorous process of self-nurturing and self-care. And I have been cancer-free for 20 years. And I do think that story changing that story is a huge part of that.
Yeah, it's wild. I since I joined the club, I have been helping. I've done some pretty extreme things as well to resolve my issues. And, now I have people who come out to me all the time. This podcast is helpful with that, but I help people find their way. There's not one way that people solve their problems, and everybody has the way they need to solve their own problem, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And having that conversation, connecting with your own self, I think through this, I've gotten in touch with my body in a way I never was. I'm intuitive now, where I know what I need, and I don't know, it's just like, I don't even think about it. It's just like, oh, you need this right now. And I'm like, oh, well, okay. And on some level, I think we're talking about the same thing. I think there's a lot of ways to describe it, and I don't, know that we completely understand it, but most definitely your body has a way of getting through to you when you're not listening.
Yes, agree. I agree. Yeah. And so does your money and your relationships and your work, all those things too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all, and that's the whole point. When we're talking about healthy living, we're talking about a holistic approach, meaning we're talking about the whole of it, and psychological, spiritual, emotional, all of the ways that we can be healthy or ill. Your body can do it the same. It can manifest a thing to say, hey, you're not dealing with this. We really need, I think your subconscious cares more about your well-being than you do sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, we're gonna get through this, and whether you listen or not, we're gonna get your attention. Mm-hmm. Well, listen, Dr. Parker, this has been a fantastic conversation. As always, you've got so much to say. I don't believe we've barely scratched the surface. I'd certainly like to invite you back to continue the conversation someday. But is there a central thought that you have to leave our listeners with that would say, wow, sum up your life's work in a couple of sentences to say, this is what you need to think about?
Well, here's what I'd like to leave your listeners with. So many times when we tell the story about who we are and how we are, we've stopped our story at the cliffhanger of our life. So we talk about ourselves in the context of being a victim of or being a survivor of. You didn't just live. Being a survivor means I lived. I lived as a minimal standard. There's a whole redemption arc that comes in our story after an event that causes us to sometimes redefine ourselves as a victim. So take stock of what story you're telling. Are you telling a story about who you are and how you are that stopped at the cliffhanger? And are you not looking at what came next? Because when we stop our story at I survived, what we do is we program the body and the brain to live in survival mode. And we're constantly looking for things to survive when we define ourselves as a survivor. Give yourself the gift of defining yourself not as a survivor, but as a thriver. when you begin to look at what needs to happen for me to change my story from surviving to thriving, who am I as a thriver, your whole reality begins to shift.
I couldn't agree with that more. I hear people talk about being, a cancer survivor. I'm like, nah, that's not good enough. Survival rate, they're talking about 3 to 5 years. I'm talking about I'm going to live a good long life, a healthy life, and I'm going to, like you say, thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's critical. Well, that's a fantastic outlook. If somebody, one of our listeners is, going, wow, I really want to hear about this training and learn more about it. How does somebody get a hold of you or find more information about what you're doing?
Well, you can go to our website, go to quantumhumandesign.com. And on that site, you can actually get a free chart of your energy blueprint, and that'll help you get started on retelling your story. And of course, you can find my book, Quantum Wellness, on any major online or sometimes bookstores outlet. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. And you can connect with us on Instagram, Dr. Karen Parker 22, and join the conversation about how do we become thrivers.
Wow, fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And again, I'd like to invite you to come back and continue the conversation one day when it's convenient. And just thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Excellent. Well, this has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine. I want to thank all of our listeners that make this show possible, and we will see you next time. This has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. We produce this show so that people can share their stories, people that have overcome obstacles, people that are undergoing obstacles. We're building a community of health-minded individuals. If you're interested in supporting the show, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to it on. If you're interested in becoming a guest, please send an email to itsjoegrumbine@gmail.com, or you can send a note into the notes section of the podcast. All right. Well, thank you for supporting this show, and we hope you've enjoyed it.